Hey, this is former Blue Devil lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. My name's Joey Weaver. He is Mike McDaniel. Mike, State of the Program series rolls on. Who we got with us today?
Conor O'Neill, welcome back. It's time to talk Wake Forest. What's going on, buddy?
Not much. We'll recap Wake's season that was, and probably the more interesting part was what came after the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that we have talked about with you on this podcast numerous times finally kind of came to fruition at the end of the season, but certainly we will get to that. Connor of the Rivals Network, covering all things Wake Forest. Go check him out there and check out all of his coverage. Wake finishes this season 4-8, Connor, and it was a thing where there were a number of close calls. I mean, that it really wouldn't have taken that much for Wake to get a couple more wins and make it to bowl eligibility. It felt like there were a lot of cases though where they just didn't quite have enough. Was that the sense that you and the fan base got coming off the season, is that they were close, or were there some real issues here that you felt like, it could have been worse?
I think you can take that both ways, honestly. I mean, for a 4-8 team that had as many close losses as they did, off the top of my head, I'm looking at the little schedule I write up every year, and write down the results. It was 1, 2, 3, 4 one-score losses. The Carolina one was a late touchdown and it was on the road, so there's a little wiggle room there. But also, I mean, they had every chance to lose the UConn and Stanford road games that they got, and yes, you have to force a team to make a mistake, but UConn and Stanford both helped Wake Forest win those games late. I mean, the one that I remember was the Stanford quarterback. I can't even remember which one it was, but he threw an interception late in that game when Stanford was driving and looked like they were either going to tie it or score a touchdown to beat Wake. So, yeah, I mean, it was another season with a lot of one-score games. The season kind of got derailed early when you think about a Virginia loss when Wake was up. I think it was 30-17 in the fourth quarter or late third quarter. You had some games that you knew were going to be lopsided when you look at Miami, Clemson, and Ole Miss and what the talent differential on the field was. But man, you also had some games that were there for the taking, and they just did not take them.
I guess just kind of looking at how this went, we talked in the preseason about the roster, and we talked about Wake Forest in the NIL era and how they're in this weird spot where, a lot of group of 5 schools are in, quite honestly, and also just lower levels of the P4 where all of your good players are essentially primed for the taking, right? And there are opportunities for other more established programs in terms of NIL to go and pluck the best players off your roster. We knew going into the year when we talked that this was a Wake Forest team that was going to be up against it from a talent standpoint. We knew that this was not the most talented roster that Clawson ever had. But when you point to some of the losses and kind of how they went, you talk about the 4 one-score losses, you talk about the more lopsided losses, which we knew were coming, and then we talked about almost blowing some of the key wins, right, out of the 4 that they had. How much of this was roster versus coaching versus quality of opponent in your estimation?
I mean, I think part of it is that, but also think like if Wake's roster was really pillaged at the end of 23 and going into this season, Damon Claiborne is somewhere else, and Jasheen Davis is somewhere else. Kevin Pointer, the defensive tackle. They brought back a ton of their offensive line. I think almost the whole thing. So, yeah, where it really hurt them was the secondary. They lost Deshaun Jones in the spring portal to Alabama, and he went there to be a backup. That was clearly a team with national championship aspirations, wanted a little depth in the secondary, and he would have rather done that than be a starter for Wake Forest. And losing Kalen Carson and Malik Mustafa to the NFL, losing Jalen Garnes, who was out of eligibility, their secondary was wrecked. And so that affected the way they played defense. Like, they changed. I'm convinced that their linebackers, I likened it to outfielders always taking the first step or two back on fly balls. Like, linebackers, I thought all year were always more inclined to take a step or two back at the snap because everything was geared toward, okay, we have to compensate for a secondary that is just overmatched and overwhelmed from a talent perspective against the receivers they had to match up against. But yeah, I mean, other parts of it were just, you can't overstate how important it is to get quarterback right, and Wake got quarterback wrong with Mitch Griffiths. Like, Mitch Griffiths was supposed to be the starter for this team, and he didn't even play college football in 2024. They had to scramble and throw two sixth-year guys into a competition that didn't have a resolution going into the opener. And they got okay quarterback play out of Hank Bachmeier. It could have been better, but it certainly, when you look at what Wake got out of the quarterback position in 23, it could have been a lot worse. So it's all of that just kind of mumbled and jumbled into another 4-8 season. Wake's 4-8 this year was better than their 4-8 in the previous season, but it's still, in the abstract, it's the same exact thing. It's 4-8. I think they had one ACC win in 23 and 2 in 24, so it's not the exact same record, but yeah, I mean, it's a record that doesn't leave a good taste in anybody's mouth, whichever way you cut it.
Yep.
And one of those ACC wins was against Stanford, like a new entrant into the conference too. Like,
yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Connor, did you sense like a growing sense of frustration from Dave Clawson as the season went on? Was there any predictability to then him retiring at season's end?
Yeah, so it's funny. You're throwing me back to a bunch of stuff that I did in December. For a good month and a half to 2 months, from like late September to mid-November, I thought the events of mid-December were inevitable. Like, to the point where I was trying to update all of my shell stories about Dave Clawson leaving Wake Forest, about, coaching candidates list. I was trying to get all that in order. And then I stopped doing that because in the last 2 weeks of the year, Dave seemed so energized and rejuvenated in talking about the things that he had been promised in rev share and what was coming down the pipe, and more of a university commitment to player retention and being able to compete and not being on the same level and the same rung as everybody else in college football, because that's never going to be the case. But he felt like the gap was going to close and the gap was going to be narrowed. And honestly, the last time the gap was narrowed, Wake was playing for an ACC championship in 21 and went 8-5 in 22 and beat Missouri in the whatever bowl that is, the Gasparilla, I think it's called. I forget those bowl names as soon as they happen because they all change every 2 or 3 years. But Dave was, I guess I can say Dave had me fooled, because he by his account, like, he was having doubts the whole time, and really they set in after the finale against Duke. But yeah, so it's like a yes and no answer again. I hate to keep doing those, but yeah, for the bulk of the season, I mean, he was just exasperated with the state of college football. There were a couple games, and you guys know this from some of Dave's earlier viral moments throughout his tenure. I mean, he was somewhere between annoyed and perturbed that, some of these teams, Miami is the one that pops off the top of my head. Miami's coaches made it very clear to Damon Claiborne on the field after the game that they thought he was really good. And that's not just being complimentary of the other team's best player. That's being complimentary of a guy who has 1 year left and might be able to come in and really help your team.
Subtle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just that kind of thing that, I mean, Dave hates that. Dave hates that that's where the game got to or is. I think it's one of the main reasons why he's not coaching anymore. I think it's one of the main reasons that if he does become a college coach again, it will be on a very lower level, like it'll be FCS or D2 or D3, where he can go back to being a teacher type of coach instead of a coach that also has to deal with every single headache that comes with being a coach in 2025 and beyond, which is where everybody says they have a general manager, but you can't convince me that the head coach is not involved in, okay, we're really going to give this guy this much money. Like he's not that good.
Yeah.
All those discussions. Dave wants no part of that.
I love the insider reporting nowadays where it's like, oh, he's emerging as one of the top front office figures in college football. I'm like, give me a break. It's like it's the head coach is on these decisions. Like pretending like it's an NFL model is insane. Like it's absolutely insane.
It's one of the reasons I love Steve Forbes so much, because at Media Day this year, he's getting questions about his general manager, Mike Muse. And Mike Muse does a great job for Wake Forest basketball. Right. But Steve just sat there and said, like, who do you think makes these decisions? Who do you think negotiates these? Who do you think is involved in the conversation when a player comes in and says, I want this much money? You think somebody other than the head coach of the basketball program is telling him, well, no, you're not getting that much?
Yeah, man. It's not the GM's head that, I mean, I guess indirectly it is, but it's the head coach's head that rolls. Like if you're
the head coach is the one who is the head coach is the one who's judged on whether they make the NCAA tournament or not, or judged on championships and judged on everything. Like, the GM is not, nobody's talking about Mike Muse doing a bad job of roster management because Wake Forest's rotation only goes 7 deep right now.
Yeah, right. We're not talking about the GM being on the hot seat.
Yeah.
I guess fast forwarding a little bit. So obviously Clausen had conversations as soon as the season ended with the athletic department and just made it clear that he wanted to step down. If he didn't have that conversation, Dickert wouldn't have been hired as quickly as he was after, the official press conference for Clausen stepping away. You hired Jake Dickert from Washington State. I like the hire for a lot of reasons. Number one, just the fact that he's had to do more with less, right?
Yeah.
On the flip side, coming from the West Coast, there are some unknowns. I mean, how is the fan base taking it? I think a lot of people, like nationally, college football people, are like, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting hire because of his history with the Washington State roster.
I think the way I would term it is tepid optimism. I mean, you'd have to be a real Lemon or a real Jeff Bzdelic to be a new hire and not have a fan base energized by what you're doing, especially in this day and age where, for a good 2 weeks there, after Christmas, it felt like Wake was getting a transfer or 3 every day. And I'm halfway convinced that fans will just react to every transfer and think that they're getting the best possible version of that transfer no matter what.
Yeah.
So every transfer is met with applause, and there's energy behind it that probably wouldn't have been there. I mean, it wasn't there. Like Dave Clausen had 2 to 3 weeks of an off season before he resigned, and they signed another typical Dave Clawson class that had some guys that you could look at and say, well, he's probably a diamond in the rough. These few guys, mostly on the lines, are probably 2 years away from us ever hearing their names and seeing them on a depth chart.
Yeah.
And their portal commits, like they got a couple guys that were going to move the needle. They were bringing in a quarterback that beat Notre Dame, Ethan Hampton of Northern Illinois, but did not have gaudy stats or anything like that.
Yep.
But now with Jake Dickert, you've re-energized the fan base. You've gotten some guys in that the previous staff probably wouldn't have gotten into the school. And that's just kind of the way it works when you have a coaching change. That again, thinking more of basketball because Wake's on their third basketball coach in the last decade.
Right.
Danny Manning was able to get guys into the school that Jeff Bzdelic couldn't. And then Steve Forbes was able to get guys into the school that Danny Manning couldn't.
Right.
Just it's always going to happen that way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm kind of with you. Like I thought I thought Wake Forest needed to hire a coach who came from at least somewhere close to the region, not all the way across the country.
Right.
And B, came from a private academic focused school. Like I know academics are not as much of a focus as they were 10 to 20 years ago, but they still matter at Wake Forest. Everybody at Wake Forest loves to tell you how much they matter. And you're bringing in a guy that, if I'm remembering Jake's bio correctly, I don't know if he's ever coached at a private school.
Looking at it now, I don't know that he has. I mean, maybe Wisconsin Stevens Point, he was a GA, but that also, I mean, I don't know if that's public or private, but yeah, most of ththese are big state schools. I mean, kind of different than Wake Forest.
So that's what surprised me at first.
Yeah.
That's like, I thought Brad White, the defensive coordinator at Kentucky, who's a Wake alum, made more sense. I thought Bob Chesney at James Madison made more sense. But there are a lot of moving parts, and some of the parts fit Wake Forest, like knowing how to win at a place that doesn't have the resources of everybody else in the conference. Yes, Jake Dickert like who else better other than somebody from Oregon State would understand that more based on the last couple of years.
Right.
So from that standpoint, yeah, it totally makes sense. And then it makes sense when you consider the last time John Curry tried to hire a football coach, he tried to hire Washington State's coach. So now he finally gets to hire Washington State's coach.
Yeah. I didn't think about that. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
That's awesome. Did John Curry give any sort of insight into his process here? I mean, I know that we said that Dave gave some notice that this was going to be happening, basically, and so it was probably more of a lengthy process than what we saw, which was what we saw. Dave's retiring, I think, on Monday. He had a press conference on Tuesday, and then Dickert was introduced on like Wednesday. Like it was all like 48 hours of all we saw. But did you get any insight into anyone else that he talked to or what his process was, like how he ended up with Jake Dickert?
The biggest insight came from Dave Clawson when he stood there at his, I feel like it was called a celebration of life. And I was walking around saying, like, he didn't die. He's pretty healthy for a 57-year-old guy. Dave's really healthy. But Dave gave the best insight when he told us this search is further along than people realize. And I think there was more to the quote. That's the part that really stuck with me, especially given how everything else played out over the next 48 hours.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had that thing with Dave on a Tuesday. On Tuesday night, Wake played a basketball game, and Dave went out on the court and talked to the fans and that kind of thing. I was still sitting in the media room because I write as slow as a turtle, and I'm getting pinged with people showing me flight tracker in Washington. There's a flight from Pullman to Winston-Salem scheduled for the next day. And I'm like, I guess that makes sense, but wouldn't that just be for an interview? I mean, the guy, we just did his farewell presser
Yeah.
10 hours ago.
Yeah.
I was just on ACC Network 4 hours ago talking about this surreal event, and Dave Clawson telling us why he doesn't want to coach in this climate anymore. And all of a sudden they've already got, you don't want to say before the body's cold, because again, Dave didn't die, but it moved so fast. And I don't know who else they talked to. I've had some whisper, like, I think they reached out to Chesney or Chesney's people. I'm trying to think of who else other than the names that I've already given. Yeah, it was such a whirlwind. And as soon as Dickert's hired, you just forget about the rest of the process, because you got to learn all about Dickert and who he's bringing with him. But yeah, I mean, I think there was a clandestine / cloak and dagger search that, I mean, kudos to John Curry and how secret and behind lock and key they keep everything over there, that word didn't leak out that Wake Forest was looking at potential replacements for Dave Clawson. So that's one of the ones where it pisses me off that they're so good at keeping secrets, but they love the fact that they're able to keep those secrets.
Speaks to a smaller school too.
It's a smaller school, and my attention is divided between Wake and Duke. Like, you go down the list of how this plays out and how it could have been different. In a different media climate, it could have been different.
Right, for sure. I guess outlook, right? I mean, we know Dickert was able to turn around Washington State under really weird circumstances with Rolovich. He steps in, does a really nice job, just ushering them kind of out of that COVID era and weird athletic department culture in terms of between head coach and AD and state and everything else. He does a really nice job kind of turning things around there. And then that's before you even talk about all the realignment stuff that happened, which like throws a wrench into the entire thing, makes it even more complicated. A little bit calmer at Wake, right? Like stable in the ACC. There are all the questions about like money and everything else. We know that, but he's dealt with that before. So like outlook wise, I know it's a kind of a weird fit in terms of regionality, but outlook wise, I mean, how do you feel about this going into it? We talked about how the fan base feels. How do you feel about it? Just kind of covering the team. What do you think kind of the outlook should be, at least in year one, and kind of what we should expect to see?
I think I go into Dickert's first season this kind of the same bar and expectation for what a successful season would look like. It's the same as I went into Clawson's what turned out to be his last season. I think getting this program back to a winning record and into a bowl game would be a really good season. I mean, nobody expects him to come in and have a Kirk Signetti put us in the CFP type of year.
Right.
I mean, you obviously don't want to have a third straight losing season where you're wondering, that'll bring into question all the things about, like, can Wake Forest still compete in the current climate? Does football matter to Wake Forest? Should Wake Forest just pour all of its resources into other sports that it can compete in, which is, men's basketball, baseball, all the country club sports that Wake Forest is good at. So yeah, it's a low bar. I think they've got some good roster pieces. Like I think it's going to be an interesting quarterback battle between Robbie Ashford coming in from South Carolina. Deshaun Purdy has a ton of raw talent coming from Charlotte. The previous staff was really high on Jeremy Hecklinski, who redshirted last season and didn't get to throw a pass, but he's a guy with 4 years of eligibility, and he was competing at the highest level of Georgia high school state football when there were some other really good quarterbacks in Georgia high school football, like Dylan Raiola. I'm blanking on the second name of the big time guy who was at Georgia high school football 2 years ago. But, Jeremy Hecklinski was thought to be the quarterback of the future by the previous staff. Whether he's the quarterback of the future for this staff, kind of start to find that out in spring practices.
Remains to be seen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, well, and looking at the schedule, Connor, we record this in early February. We're a week or so removed from the schedule release. I mean, you've got a pair of FCS games. Well, no, there's not. Well, I don't really know what we're considering Delaware for next year.
I can't keep track of which one. I guess I've said it enough now that I know it. Western Carolina is the FCS team.
Yes.
Delaware is the team that is halfway between FCS and FBS, where they've played 1 year as a transitioning school. This is their second year as a transitioning school.
Oh, I didn't even realize they were transitioning already. I thought this was like their first year is in Conference USA, I guess.
I'm pretty now you're making me doubt it. Damn it, Joey. I'm pretty sure they're the one transitioning, and Kennesaw State has had 2 years to be transitioning, so now they're full-time FBS.
Yes. Yeah.
It's confusing, man. And then they're to throw on top of it, they had the what's the best word for this? The game, like the 3-card Monty. They had the 3-card Monty with the scheduling where they moved they bought out the Ole Miss game. They're going to Oregon State instead. So as much as they want to escape Malik Murphy, who threw the touchdown pass that ended their season at 4-8 instead of 5-7, they will see Malik Murphy again when they go to Oregon State. And Jake Dicker will see Oregon State again after.
Right.
I think there were viral comments from him this year where he said, like, everybody wants to make it out like Washington State and Oregon State are supposed to be in this together. And no, we're not in this together. We want to beat them.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember now. I'd forgotten. I mean, it was September. It really wasn't that long ago, but it gets mixed up in the shuffle of the season is Wake doing that buyout of the Ole Miss game. And it was a little bit, I don't know. I feel like it was a little bit ugly in the media when it happened, but at some point it's like, I mean, we just lost to them by 34 points. They're playing a different game than we are. Like, what's in this for us to even play this game? And so you kind of understand it, although, the how is maybe a little bit tougher than the what was in that case.
There were more logistics to it than that. And I covered it with Foyas. The Ole Miss contract was written like 10 years ago, and it's become more commonplace to include travel costs. Like the home team covers the travel cost of the visiting team. So that wasn't the case in the old contract. It is the case in the new contract that Wake has with Oregon State. So Oregon State will pay for Wake Forest stuff to come out to Oregon State. Wake would have been paying for all their own stuff to go to Ole Miss.
Gotcha.
So they're saving money that way. I mean, my personal opinion is it's not saving enough money to justify buying out a game that your fan base was really excited to go to, that you probably were going to lose by 30 to 40 points. But it's done. It is what it is. They're saving some coin. So,
yep. But either way, I mean, with again, Kennesaw State, Western Carolina, Delaware, all at home. I mean, that you would like to think you can win all 3 of those games this fall, and then at that point, can you find 3 more wins, as you mentioned, between Oregon State and Corvallis, and then your ACC slate? So, I mean, it seems like there is an opportunity for a decent start here for Jake Dickert and this new staff. I guess the last question I have for you, Connor, and Mike had to jump, unfortunately, but last question I've got for you on this is one of the things that I think Dave Clawson always did and really was a big piece of the program that he built was some pretty disciplined redshirting of a lot of his incoming freshmen. And as you kind of mentioned, I mean, some of these linemen coming in, we're not going to hear their names for 2 years. Yeah, it's like you spend some time strength and conditioning and learning systems and like that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden you've got a redshirt sophomore who's bigger than he was in high school and knows what he's doing and can get on the field and kind of do things. Has Dickert indicated made any indication that that's a practice that he wants to try to continue, or is that something that you feel like, and certainly I feel like more doesn't really fit as much with this current age of college football with, how easy it is to transfer and go recruit guys off other people's, rosters and everything else like that?
Yeah, I think a bit of that remains to be seen. I think Dickert has been realistic in talking about some level of Wake Forest football program will always have to be a developmental program. They're never going to, I mean, I hate to break it to Wake fans or anybody who's out there hoping for it, but Wake is never going to have top 10 or 20 recruiting classes in the current form. It's just not going to happen. Like, you're always going to have to find the diamonds in the rough. You're always going to have to find, those multi-sport kids that you can project. And that was what Dave and his staff did really well, especially I think of it more than anything on the offensive line, because they've put a lot of good offensive linemen have graduated from Wake Forest and like gone into the pros. Phil Haynes, Zach Thomas, the Packers starting right tackle. They've gotten NFL years out of some other guys. I think Justin Huron is still on a roster, maybe with the Saints, but they found, 260-pound multi-sport guys. They stick them in the weight room for 2 years and they come out really athletic and 300 pounds and they're still able to move their feet and retain their athleticism. So I think that's going to have to remain. I think Jake knows that. I'm pretty sure he said it on some level. But yeah, it's always going to have to be there. And that's part of the fun of covering Wake Forest moving forward, is figuring out, hey, does this still work in the current landscape?
Yep. Makes total sense. Well, it'll be interesting to see kind of what this program, how it's similar, how it's different, are they able to succeed? Obviously a new era starting here. And we've also talked a little bit on the show about, do we really expect that Clawson is the last one of this current crop of coaches to throw their hands up and walk away? Because it feels like there might be a couple other longtime folks in the conference that kind of old school guys, one maybe not so far away in Raleigh, who might say, I'm good with this. I'm out. So will be interesting to see. Conor, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Can you tell people real quick where they can go find your stuff?
Yeah. wakeforest.rivals.com is my website, Deacons Illustrated. Drop by and check out the content. It's a lot of basketball stuff right now, which will be confusing for Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast, but drop on by. It's cheap to sign up, and not every article is paywalled, so you can click on there and just read the free ones if you want.
There you go. And at Conor O'Neill _DI on Twitter as well. Go find them there for all sorts of wonderful Wake Forest coverage. In other words, just ACC commentary, college sports commentary.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, sometimes I think I tweet too much, and I think if I'm not already over it, I'm on the verge of hitting 100,000 tweets, which is a little depressing, but yeah.
Yeah. You tweet too much. Yeah, we all do. Anyways, Conor, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for your time. We try to catch up with you sometime soon. Maybe get together one more time before we do season previews here in the fall.
Sounds good. Thanks, Joey.
All right. As mentioned, Mike had to jump. We'll work on getting out of here. As mentioned, come find us on Twitter. We're gonna keep these state of the program episodes rolling. Subscribe, youtube.com/@the-ACC football podcast. Go find us on various social medias. You'll find where to find us. The email address to basketballconferencepodcast@gmail.com. As mentioned, we will be back. We're going to keep these rolling, so keep it tuned here, and we will keep you entertained throughout the offseason. Anyways, for Mr. Mike McDaniel, for Mr. Conor O'Neill, I am Joey Weaver. We will talk to you all again very, very soon. Until next time, go Deeks and go ACC.